Ratchet and Clank, a series about a made-up animal called a Lombax and his small robot friend going on epic space adventures with crazy weapons and gadgets and plenty of bad guys to kill. It's been a fairly successful series at that, spawning just over a dozen games with varying degrees of quality. I've always been a huge fan of the games, with the first one being one of the first games I ever played. Now I'm sure y'all know the background as to how this game was created. Insomniac Games used to be the original creators of another series, Spyro the Dragon on PS1, but after 3 games and a lack of any new ideas, they decided to move on to create a brand new franchise on the more powerful PS2. Universal owned the license to Spyro and handed the game over to multiple developers to continue the series forward, and well, they tried. But enough about that, let's get on to the actual review. The game starts off with a fairly simple story. We see Ratchet, who is trying to build a ship to leave a planet that he's been stuck on his whole life, but he's missing the last piece of the puzzle, which is a robotic ignition system. On another planet we see Clank, who was just born inside this robot facility and stumbles across an infobot which reveals Chairman Drax's plans to destroy every planet in the galaxy by taking pieces out of each one so he can create his own for his race known as the Blarg. So after a quick getaway and crash landing, Ratchet goes to check out the crash site, and now we can play the game. Right from the beginning, this feels like your normal 3D platformer adventure, but quickly sets itself apart. First off, through the inclusion of guns. Ratchet isn't really your average hero mascot or whatever from the first game. I mean, if you mess with him, then he'll most likely blow your fucking brains out. So anyway, we get to practice some of the game's mechanics, trying out the wrench and bomb glove on enemies and breaking boxes to collect bolts to buy more guns. The controls are fine. Square lets you swing Ratchet's wrench, holding triangle brings up a quick select which you can choose your favourite weapons to make them easier to select, and circle lets you fire your guns. Also worth mentioning is that Ratchet has a double jump, which doesn't really give him any extra height, but he can also pull off some pretty sick flips that gives you more options on how to take down enemies. So after murdering the local wildlife and destroying a few robots, Ratchet finds Clank and takes him back to his garage. After Clank wakes up, we finally hear our two protagonists speak. Clank informs Ratchet that he's looking for someone to help him save the solar system and wants to find Captain Quark because he saw him on a poster. Clank shows Ratchet Drax's plans to destroy the solar system and asks him to take him to the coordinates contained in the infobot. The two strike a deal as Ratchet agrees to take Clank to this planet if he can get Ratchet's ship started for him. You see, that's how you do an opening. They've started their adventure together, but they're not exactly best friends yet. All they've done is agree to work together for each other's benefit. I mean, it's not like in this game where they become friends after 5 seconds of meeting each other because hey, that's the name of the game. The relationship builds up over the course of the game and goes through its highs and lows, as you'll see later on. Every level in the game is packed with its own unique style, almost every one featuring new enemies, climates, and memorable characters for Ratchet and Clank to interact with. Hell, within the next 3 planets after Veldin, we meet 4 legendary characters who all make appearances in later titles: the Plumber, Big Al, Helga, and Skid McMarks. Another cool thing about these planets is their overall level design. Besides planets that feature a boss battle or Veldin, every level has at least 2 or more routes which can be explored in any order. This certain degree of freedom which is given to the player helps make each planet feel less linear than what it really is. You feel like you're exploring a real, breathing world rather than just a plain level. One thing that quickly becomes apparent to anyone that's played any of the later Ratchet and Clank titles is how much slower paced the gameplay in the first game feels. The lack of strafing means that it's much harder to just run and gun your way into every encounter. Most of the time you'll have to choose what weapon you're going to use and plan how you will approach the bad guys before you make your move. Will you stand far back and use the Visibomb to take out the tougher enemies before running in with the Pyrocitor to finish the weaker enemies, or get in closer with the Blaster and use the Glove of Doom robots as backup? It helps that there's not a single useless weapon in the game. Every weapon has its own unique purpose that brings something different to the table. On top of that, 10 out of the 15 total weapons can be upgraded to its gold version if you've collected all 40 gold bolts and already have a fuck ton of ordinary bolts. And of course, no Ratchet game is complete without a Rhino, and the original is probably my favourite. It shoots out a barrage of missiles which automatically locks on to any enemies no matter what direction you're facing. Seriously, just pull this thing out in front of the bad guys and they'll already know they fucked up. As I mentioned earlier, the relationship between our main duo changes throughout the game, which I think is pretty unique. I mean, we don't see Jack and Daxter or Banjo and Kazooie hating each other at any point, do we? Just before the halfway point of the game, Ratchet and Clank end up finding Captain Quark and follow him to Planet Quartu, where they find out that Captain Quark is actually working with Chairman Drek this whole time and betrays them. Obviously this leads to Ratchet getting pissed off, and now all he wants is cold hard revenge, whereas Clank still understands that there's more important things to be focusing on, like stopping planets from being blown up. Ratchet kinda goes through many different character arcs throughout the game, which shows him developing into the hero he becomes by the end. Before Quark's betrayal, he was more laid back, not really caring too much about saving the galaxy, but more rather interested in trying out cool weapons and gadgets and going hoverboarding. Then, after Quark's betrayal, he starts to have a clear objective, wanting nothing more than to hunt down Captain Quark, but has to stick around with Clank because he's the only one that can start their ship. It's not until after Ratchet defeats Quark on Gamlik Base that he realizes his selfishness for focusing on Quark, as there's a lot bigger things at stake. I think Ratchet's personality changes are important in the storytelling of the first game, as if he was just your average hero from the start, he wouldn't have been as memorable in my opinion. He's not a hero right out of the gate, but after the experiences and emotions he goes through is what shapes him into the hero that he becomes. I've talked about Ratchet for a while now that I feel like I'm neglecting Clank, so I guess I gotta talk about him. There's two sections in the game where you get to play as small Clank, which honestly I thought were just okay. The whole idea behind them is that Clank has to control these robots in order to do tasks for him, like follow him, attack enemies, or enter a lock. Look, after you've played this game as much as I have, these sections just start to feel repetitive. On Orxon, the Clank section goes on a bit too long for me, but tries to mix things up with some basic, and I use this word lightly, puzzle elements, which is essentially figuring out how to get the bots past a door that will only stay open if someone is on the button, and also this part where you have to learn the patterns of these laser things. Another cool thing about Clank is that he's able to turn into Giant Clank, which just makes him this absolute badass war machine, and now we see Ratchet on Clank's back for a change. Again, there's only two sections where we get to see this, one being in the final boss fight with Chairman Drek. And speaking of boss fights, there are 4 in the entire game, with all of them being fairly straightforward to take down. Except for Chairman Drek, which can still be a bit of a challenge if you haven't got the right weapons, or haven't upgraded your nanotech. As I mentioned earlier about the lack of strafing, it becomes more annoying during these boss fights. Instead of being able to strafe left and right to dodge an attack while continuing to shoot, you have to stop shooting, hurry and move Ratchet out of the way, turn back and wait till the green target shows up so you can hit the enemy. However, I do think everyone can agree that strafing in Ratchet 1 would make the game too easy, and then not having it included adds an extra level of challenge. And yes, that does mean that I think the later Ratchet and Clank titles are a little easier due to being able to continually fire your weapons no matter what, unless you're out of ammo. Another thing I want to bring up about the overall game is how gorgeous the graphics are. They don't really look the best on the video because I recorded the gameplay from my PlayStation 2, but even still, for an early PS2 game, this looks really good, all while running at a smooth 60 FPS. Seriously, how do they do this shit? Metropolis is the best example. The level is filled with details on buildings covered in vegetation, flying cars, and a strong range of colours to create a city that feels alive, and that you're only exploring this one small area when there's a whole planet's worth of this stuff. There's so many unique planets to explore, each with incredibly different styles. By the end of the game, I think it was a nice touch that Ratchet and Clank finish off back where they started on Velden, and that final cutscene was just perfect in solidifying the friendship that these two have. It's good to know that after this they go on to have about a dozen more adventures together, and it's all thanks to having a good origin story. Once you've beat the game, you can go back through to collect skill points, gold bolts, and the gold weapons in order to fully complete the game, and challenge mode offers a good bit of replayability by letting you keep your weapons, bolts, and nanotech upgrades. However, the enemies aren't any stronger, and many consider this mode easier than the normal mode. Also, a goodies option is added to the pause screen, which lets you access things like cutscenes, artwork, cheats, and even a behind the scenes look at the making of Ratchet and Clank if you collect everything. So that was Ratchet and Clank. Overall, I'd give this game a 7 out of 10. It's a great game, and I believe that it even outshines the 2016 reboot. It was a cool original idea by Insomniac Games to create a space game about a mechanic and a small robot exploring planets with crazy weapons and gadgets. and the fact that it's still going strong to this day shows how much people love the series. So join me next time when I'll be taking a look at the sequel, Ratchet and Clank 2 Go in Command. Ratchet and Clank Locked and Loaded. Shit.